We're going to go to Peter in Chicago now. Peter, tell us a little bit about IEG, just for those of you who don't know. It's a legendary name in the sponsorship space. But what is IEG? And then tell us a little bit about this report that you put together.
Sure. Well, first off, thank you, Afdel and Bobby, for the time, and to my fellow panelists as well for the time today. It's been interesting to kind of see the preceding content. IEG is a sponsorship consultancy that's been in business for close to 40 years, and our charge in the marketplace is a little bit different in terms of we sort of operate between brands and properties and help to provide insight and advisory around the commercial transaction of sponsorship. So what we're going to talk about today is a little bit different than the preceding content, talk a little bit about the value equation that is occurring with what we're all experiencing in terms of COVID, in terms of value that's being essentially put on hold from a sponsorship perspective. But IEG has been in business since the early 80s. We like to think of ourselves as a bit of a thought leader in sponsorship, all the way from the top levels of sport down to your local road races.
Great. Well, let's dive into the super interesting data that you guys have collected. And I know there's lots of folks from the sponsorship community out there. Please keep the questions coming in. Peter will get to them in after this presentation in a bit.
Sure. So let me give cyberspace a minute to catch up. Is that coming through, Afdel?
Yep, coming through loud and clear. Go ahead.
Okay. So in terms of forecasting the future, I wouldn't be on this webinar if I was able to forecast the future, but I do think that, we took a little bit of some time early on in the process to really try to get an understanding of how brands and properties are perceiving this essential full stoppage of the live experience. So the first reason why we did this study was primarily guidance. There are so many unknowns right now that we felt like it was a good idea for us to get an understanding of how brands and properties are talking to each other, not talking to each other. We got a lot of clients calling us saying, "What are you hearing?" I think everyone is really exchanging information. How did we do it? We issued online surveys to about 600 top sponsorship buyers and sellers. There were no agencies involved in the process. We did not capture where they were from or who they were. We sent it out to a good number of people across the full spectrum of sports, really trying to cover sports and cause and entertainment, really trying to cover the commercial lens of sponsorship. So it was really important for us to kind of take a view of how the industry is going to come together in this sort of reset that I think we're all going to experience. And it was said earlier that this is a defining moment, and it's certainly commercially defining moment as well in terms of what we're dealing with. So based on the findings of the survey, we sat down and did an interview with Sahil Patel from CMO Today at Wall Street Journal, and it featured the perspectives of both brands and properties. The article lays out the challenges and the opportunities that we're going to really kind of get involved in. And really, quite frankly, without sounding too dramatic about it, this is going to be the largest value realignment that I think we have seen in our lifetimes relative to the commercial side of sponsorship. So it's really important to get a really good understanding of what we found in terms of the learning. So let's get into some of the details of what we found. So firstly, I think it's fair to say that there's a lot of value that isn't being lost necessarily. It's really quite literally on hold. So what we wanted to do was size that impact. And the way we did that on the left here is that we made an estimate that about $10 billion of rights fees that have been paid in return for value will need to be made up. This assumption is based on a 6-month shutdown, a 1-to-1 return ratio on value paid, and an estimate that about 80% of the valued assets are essentially suspended. Moving over to the right of the slide, not only is the financial impact fairly wide, it's affecting everyone. There's about 120,000 active sponsorship agreements that are being impacted or on hold across 5,000 distinct sponsors. So what starts to happen here for me is this is where we see the opportunity for a reset, right? I think that the industry has an opportunity to become very creative, to innovate, and to be flexible. And I think we're learning this in our personal lives. We are really having to lean into this sort of base notion of relationships. In fact, we received a lot of very insightful verbatims from the folks that we queried for this survey, and they are telling us We have to switch gears. We have to listen to each other. We have to realize that this isn't personal, it's business. And it's happening not because of non-performance, it's happening because you were unable to perform the sponsorship that was contemplated originally for the brand. So it's really important to kind of keep that human element involved, even though we're kind of talking with a commercial lens here. One of the largest tensions that we observed is around timing. And I think we're all dealing with that at home as well. So we kind of look at the left-hand side of the slide here. This is a perpetual state of suspension. I think everyone feels like every day is the same. We have jokes around that with Blur's Day and renaming all the weekdays. But brands essentially have the advantage here. And the reason why they have the advantage is because they're able to pivot to other areas of the marketing mix. They can shift assets around. They can change back to above the line. They can change messaging. They can lean more heavily into social and digital. So in their cases, they want to wait, right? The properties seem to have fewer options from the highest level of sport all the way down to, again, a local road race. They don't really know. They're in this state of suspension. There's nothing that they can really do until they know the fate of their year. So what that's doing is it's causing this time frame to keep extending itself. And close to 90% of the respondents believe it's going to be 3+ months before anything goes back to what it was, with almost 40% saying that it's going to be longer than 6 months. Now, one of the important pieces here is a way we asked this question was around this idea of normalcy. We've heard a lot of new terms that are coming out because of COVID, the new normal, the future normal, the next normal. I don't think anything is going to go back to normal in terms of this conversation. I think it's going to be, again, a realignment and a bit of a reset. Where we did see some alignment in terms of both of the two groups of respondents agreeing with each other was really kind of around that this is a wholesale reanalysis or reevaluation around spending, around the way sponsorships are structured, around the way contracts are written to contemplate future occurrence, and even the reconciliation. We know that the reconciliation, as we're calling it, is going to need to happen on a case-by-case basis. There is no one-size-fits-all approach to how people are going to reconcile this differential. Not surprisingly, this point down here on the bottom is that we are seeing a lot of agreement on an increased reliance on social, digital, and branded integration. This is primarily because obviously these elements of the marketing mix generally are insulated from the volatility of the live experience. I don't think anyone contemplated volatility in a live experience outside of attendance going up or down, or teams winning or losing. But ultimately, we have seen in the past social and digital have taken sometimes a backseat to the live experience. And I think that's a trend that's going to shift as we come into a new normal. Most of the tensions that we saw were obviously financial related, right? The reconciliation and the value gap, as we're calling that, it is going to need to happen. It's not going to take forever. It's not going to be a lingering issue, but there's a bit of a statistical difference between the properties agreeing that all the lost sponsorship value is going to be made up and there's intent there. The brands are really feeling a little bit less certain about that. And that leads kind of to the middle of this slide, which is that obviously, and this is no surprise or should be no surprise to anyone, the properties are going to work like heck to try to retain the cash that they have from brands. And the brands in some cases are going to be forced to get money back. So there are going to need to be relationship-driven, partnership-driven conversations. And in the verbatims that we took, some of the brands were actually concerned about hurting the relationships that they have with their properties by asking them for money back, which was really interesting to us as we analyze the results. And then finally on the right here, and this goes to the point on the earlier slide, that half of the properties basically said, I have to start over. Whereas the brands did not agree to the same level, obviously, because they can pivot. They can move their stuff around. They can go on television. They can go above the line. They can go to social and digital. The properties are rooted in the live experience, and the live experience is on hold. So there's a bit more of an overhaul happening there. So we did ask both groups what they're interested in terms of make goods. The brands, obviously, at the top 3 level, they want the things that we're talking about, the fact that we're going to lean into more heavily: social media, branded content integration. Traditional advertising is seeing a comeuppance here. And then the third one is an activation fund, which I call a cash deferral, right? Those are the three most important things that brands said, if I had to take a make good now, these are the things that I would take. On the right-hand side, obviously it's a little bit all over the place in terms of what the rights holders are able to offer. Their options, as we've talked about up until this point, are a little bit more variant. So this was an open text field in the survey. In certain cases, there's a conversation here about whether or not these elements are the same value as what was originally contemplated in a sponsorship agreement. And that's where relationships hopefully will rule the day, and there won't be a lot of issues that happen coming out of contractual resolutions. So kind of wrap things up here, the top concerns of the decision makers outside of the obvious ones, right, which are spending, industry job loss, and the length of the downtime. Consumer sentiment is a big one, right? There's a big one is that we could open everything up tomorrow. Take Georgia, for example. Georgia's reopening its state, but a lot of consumers aren't totally sure that they're ready. So this consumer sentiment idea is going to happen with large public gatherings. It's going to happen with travel, both business and personal. So consumer comfort about attending events and running your life the way you used to is a big concern for the industry, as are scheduling conflicts, right? There's is going to be like a sports fan's dream in fourth quarter and first quarter of next year. If all of the things that we say are still going to happen end up happening, there's going to be a lot of sports happening on television, events happening, et cetera. And I think that it's going to be really difficult to manage all of that. We are looking at that as the potential to run out of real estate. And that's going to be a potential issue for brands and rights holders. And then the final one, which is super relevant to the prior two presentations, is around tone, messaging sensitivity, the fear of appearing tone deaf or being too self-promotional or being too commercial. Those are definitely at the forefront of the brand's concerns as we move forward. So to wrap things up, the key takeaways for us is that we know we are feeling, unfortunately, fairly confident that spending in sponsorship is going to decrease as a result of everything that we're going through, or be reevaluated altogether. We know there's no one size fits all approach. We know literally the sales model by which properties and brands interact and transact with each other has changed overnight. Some sectors will flourish based on this. I believe community-based events and things that are smaller, just by definition, will witness a little bit of a right sizing in a good way for them. And then I think we all can agree too that the pandemic is more than definitely going to change the way future partnerships are contemplated, designed, and executed. So that wraps it up. Again, thank you very much for the time. And for anyone on the webinar, please feel free to reach out to me directly on LinkedIn or through our website, which is simply named sponsorship.com. But thank you guys for the time. Hopefully I didn't take too much time away from questions.